Week 12. I cannot believe we are now 3 months into the regular season. But of course, we have so much going on right now with the fantasy playoffs just a couple of weeks away. We have the bye apocalypse, 6 teams on bye this week. But of course, we have to get into what the waivers are going to look like as we head into week 12. But before we get into your questions, we have plenty going along in the chat. Of course, I need to introduce my co-host, Matt LaMarca. LaMarca, how you doing, man? I missed last week. Seemed like you guys were able to hold it down. So what have we got going on for week 12 for the folks?
Yeah, me and Jeff did our best without you. Everything's going good. I, too, cannot believe how fast this NFL season is just sort of flying by. But at the same time, I'm excited for it, ready for the fantasy playoffs and then the NFL playoffs and, ultimately crowning a new champ. It's all good things, and I'm happy to be here at Fantasy Life and be a part of it.
I don't know, man. Well, of course, I'm happy to be here at Fantasy Life, but I'm just looking at the waiver wire list. It's looking like it's not the best week for people. That it's a tough week. If folks don't know, go ahead and FantasyLife.com. Check out our waiver wire tool that's available. Free tool that allows you to see what the recommendations are from our crew here at Fantasy Life to set. These are the guys we should be targeting when we're making those roster decisions heading into the following week. And this week, our ad of the week is Elijah Moore, wide receiver 3, or I guess you would say like the wide receiver 3 for the Cleveland Browns. And so if he is our top ad, Roschon Johnson, the RB2 for the Bears, if those are your top ads for the week, it's probably not the best week to be making those start-sit decisions based off of guys you pick up off the waiver wire. But it is what it is. We're here to help you guys out. So if you have any questions, go ahead and drop them into the chat. Our producer, Paul, will be adding those up and flashing them up on the screen as we get into it, and we'll be able to answer as many as we can. If not, check out the rankings, check out our waiver wire tool, check out our projections, all of the stuff that's available over on FantasyLife.com, and we'll make sure that we get all the content, all the stats, all the things that you need so that you're ready to make that playoff push that you need. All right, so let's go ahead and dive into it. I see one question already up in the chat. Let's see if we can hop on into that. And then we'll go from there. So from TB12, BB6, what's going on, man? Hi, guys. Can you prioritize these ads? Dropping Juju, Thielen, Watson, or Quentin Johnston? Out of those three, LaMarca, what are you feeling? Because Watson popped up for 150 yards this past week. Thielen, looks like at least the Panthers coming off bye. We might see a little bit more out of Jonathan Brooks. I heard that from the Panthers, at least from Dave Canales earlier this week. Of course, Quentin Johnston having an excellent game against my Bengals. Out of those three guys, who is the one that you would be prioritizing?
I think if I'm looking at this week specifically, I'm going with Quentin Johnston. He's got that juicy matchup versus the Ravens on Monday Night Football coming up. I feel like we've talked about Johnston a lot on this show. His role with the team is not as steady as I would typically want for a guy that I am starting in my fantasy lineups, right? He's got a 19% target share for the year, but he does offer enough big play explosiveness, and he's scoring plenty of touchdowns. That kind of stuff can be a little bit volatile, so it does give him, I think a lower floor than you might expect for a wide receiver 3. But at this point, and in that matchup specifically, he's definitely startable. I do think, though, that long-term, the guy that I would prefer to be attached to is Christian Watson. I think he just plays in a more explosive offense. We saw the numbers tick up for him a bit in week 11, 25% target share. And what you really love about him is the air yards, right? 76% air yard share last week, 40% the week prior. As far as like big play explosiveness goes, Watson is right up there in the same sort of tier as Johnston. So I think, again, this week, QJ for me, but long-term, I would probably rather have Watson as a guy that I'm stashing on my bench. If something happens to one of those wide receivers in front of him in Green Bay, he could become an every week start type player.
I completely agree. I would say the rankings for me for this week would be Quentin Johnston, Christian Watson right behind him. And LaMarca, would you agree? I think Adam Thielen is probably a tier below both of those. I'd say it's a fairly distant beat between QJ and Christian Watson and Adam Thielen. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, we've seen Thielen produce with Bryce Young in the past, but it's just so hard to get excited about any part of this Panthers passing attack.
100% agreed there. And I would say the other thing pointing in Quentin Johnston's direction for week 12, not just the matchup against the Ravens. We've seen their secondary give up a number of big games like so far this year. And if you go over to FantasyLife.com, check out our free, I believe this is free, like DVP tool that's available. Go ahead and check out the wide receiver tab. The Baltimore Ravens, they are right now the number one defense against wide receivers, 43 points per game allowed to the wide receiver position. So if you were going to target anybody, it would be Quentin Johnson. But also from the Chargers, Ladd McConkey, rookie wide receiver, did leave the game like with a shoulder injury. We don't know what his status is going to be for week 12. I'm not projecting he's going to miss time, but if he is a little bit dinged up, and that's not the first time that McConkey has had injury concerns so far this season, it would lend itself a bit more to Johnson being somewhat more involved with the Chargers pass game moving forward. And of course, if you were to look at any of the quarterbacks associated with the wide receivers listed, Johnston has Justin Herbert, Christian Watson has Jordan Love, and of course, Adam Thielen has Bryce Young. I'm going to go with the guy attached to Justin Herbert. That's just, again, we're splitting hairs here, but if we want to look at the matchup, we want to look at the injury concerns and also the quarterback production, I'd say the guy attached to Justin Herbert would be first on my list, and then we'll go down, and then from Jordan Love thereafter. All right. So, excellent question. Again, as we see a few more folks starting to funnel into the chat, drop your questions here. Lamarck and I will pull up whatever piece of content, whatever tool that we can have access to here at Fantasy Life to do our best to contextualize your question, give you the best guidance so that you have the best answers and analysis heading into week 12. That's our job for the next 45 minutes to an hour or so, and we'll get to as many as we can as we move on through the hour. Looks like we got another one. Oh, from our own Cooter Doodle. What's up, CD? How you doing? Let's see. Let's ask this question. We do have a few more questions. And if you're not available on the normal socials, we also have a Discord community managed by our own Sam Wallace here at Fantasy Life. Drop those in there, and we'll be sure to try and get those into the chat as well. If not live, but if maybe save those for next week, we'll see what we can. But let's see what's CD got for us as a question. So let's see. Roschon or Trey Benson for standalone rest of season values in desperate leagues. Asking for a friend. I don't know if CD is the friend in this case or not. I guess we'll leave that up to interpretation.
It's always the friend, right?
I think it's usually the friend. Who's to say, really? I'll give her the benefit of the doubt. So between Roschon and Trey Benson, standalone rest of season value, at least for me, I like where the Cardinals are from a team standpoint. I think as they were heading into some of the tougher matchups, like on their schedule, they had to play against the Chargers, Miami, Chicago, and the Jets. That 4-ish week stretch, I didn't have too much hope for the Cardinals, at least from an offensive standpoint. But lo and behold, Kyler Murray's been playing well, and we've seen a good amount of rushing production, especially from James Conner. I lean towards Trey Benson in this case, but Lamar, what are you thinking here?
I hard disagree. I think if you're looking at one guy that you need to start, if you're, in that sort of desperate situation, I think Roschon Johnson has way more standalone value at the moment. He has carved out a role as like the power back in Chicago. I think specifically he's going to be a threat to score a touchdown just about every single week. And that is something that I can't really say about Trey Benson, right? Trey Benson has more contingent value. He's arguably the more exciting prospect, but he still has a big James. Roschon has to deal with DeAndre Swift, so that's going to keep him from being, a true every down type player, but he has already carved out that role around the goal line. He had 88% of the short yardage snaps last week to go along with 34% of the carries. I think that he is not somebody that you necessarily want to be starting, but if you have to start him, I think that you could do worse in terms of like a desperate play.
All right, so let's see. I pulled up the utilization report, the game logs that are available on FantasyLife.com. I think this is with the tier 2 subscription that you're going to need. And to your point, Lamarca, Roschon Johnson already does have the contingent, or at least the standalone value that you would want from an RB2 standpoint. Over the past, I think 3 to 4 weeks, around like 30 to 40% of the snaps so far, mixing in for about like 15 to 20% of the carries here and there. So that's what you would want to see from a running back that would at least demonstrate that he's a part of the team's offensive game plan on a week-to-week basis. It's not just they're waiting for an injury to happen or something along those lines. So I agree. Now, looking at the data, I do kind of agree with you here that if the Bears are starting to look better offensively, Caleb Williams didn't look like an absolute train wreck. It's actually heartbreaking to see them lose another game, especially that divisional game against the Packers this past week. But still, if Roschon Johnson is not just getting the carries, but also I think the biggest thing, and to your point earlier, is that he's getting some of the goal line carries just this past week, 67% of the carries from inside the 5. So if he's getting the opportunities in the areas that matter, versus Benson, we do really see him as more of that running back. Should something happen to James Conner, that is more of a path for him to actually get more fantasy value. I'm gonna have to switch my answer now. I think Roschon is probably the better option for you, CD. So tell your friend that Roschon Johnson is the better of those two options. So hopefully, and of course, CD replies that my friend says thank you. So we're here to help your friend, CD. That is what we're here for, and all the friends of Fantasy Life. So that's what we're trying to do here. So we appreciate the help for sure. Appreciate being able to provide the help for sure. All right, so we've seen a few more questions in the chat, but of course, if you have any additional questions or need some more context, plenty of stuff available on the website right now. If you haven't already, go ahead and check out Kendall Valenzuela's waiver wire column that should be available on the site. When walking through all of the top pickups for week 12. Again, we mentioned earlier Elijah Moore being the wide receiver that you should be targeting, especially given the way that the Browns passing game has been operating so far with Jameis Winston under center. Lamarca, I was talking to Ian Hartz about this yesterday on the Fantasy Life show. Every start so far for Jameis Winston, 400 air yards per game, like for Jameis Winston. He has been exactly what we expected him to be so far. I mean, just hucking the ball downfield. It doesn't matter if it's to Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, Jerry Jeudy. I mean, all of those guys. But of course, the aforementioned Roschon Johnson also being a part of the waiver wire column. So if you don't get your question answered here, or even if you're listening to this after we're done recording, go ahead and check out the waiver wire column. Look at our start sit tool that's available, or our waiver tool that's also available in order to make sure that you're getting all the help that you need for week 12. All right, so let's see. What other questions do we have here? Do we want to get one out of the chat? I mean, producer Paul, you tell us. Like, we're like dealer's choice. Do we want to go with one out of the chat, or we want to get one out of the Discord? We'll go with whatever direction that you want. Looks like we got a little from the chat. This is from Arturo Flores. Is this the week Jaden Daniels bounces back? So not that great on Thursday night. Watching Jaden Daniels not really find much from a either rushing or passing production standpoint. Tough matchup going up against the Eagles. This week, they do get another divisional matchup, but it's against the Dallas Cowboys. So I'm thinking we should see a bit more from Jaden Daniels, but where are you at on this one, Lamarca?
Yeah, you're going to keep riding out Jaden Daniels. I mean, unless you're just so absolutely loaded at quarterback that you have him and a guy like a Lamar Jackson or something like that, you just can't take Daniels out of your lineup. I do think it's possible that this Commanders offense is less explosive down the stretch. I mean, we've seen that plenty of times in the past where guys come in and they sort of take the league by storm, and the offense then sort of fizzles as more tape becomes available on them. I'm not saying that's going to be the case with the Commanders. I still think they're a very good unit, but this was a team that was the best offense in football during the first 6 or 7 weeks of the year. I'm tempering expectations just a bit, but I still think Jaden Daniels slam dunk QB1 for fantasy purposes.
Oh, I agree. And I think it's not just the matchup, but also the way that Daniels has been used. The rib injury that he sustained was at about like a month to 5 weeks ago has been somewhat of a limiting factor from a rushing standpoint for Jaden Daniels. His design rushing rate has been down lower to where he was at early in the season. The first 3 weeks of the season, he had design rushing rates of 20%, around 15%, and 15% in the 2 weeks afterwards. These past 3 weeks, 20% against the Giants, 10% against the Steelers, and 11% against the Eagles. So we have seen less of Daniels as a runner, still scrambling when he needs to. But if we're not getting that rushing component, and we haven't seen a bit more from any of the pass catchers outside of Terry McLaurin, like Zach Ertz, like working his way in there here and there, but haven't seen a ton out of Noah Brown since the Hail Mary. Luke McCaffrey dropping a couple passes here and there. So I can understand against the Steelers and Eagles, both tough outs defensively, why we haven't seen a lot from Jaden Daniels as a passer. So against the Cowboys, shouldn't be much of a problem given how we saw Nico Collins and then CJ Stroud rip them up just last night. I think Jaden Daniels has to be in the QB1 conversation moving forward, but hopefully better days ahead for him, at least, especially for me, because I've got him on a couple of rosters. So hopefully that turns out to be the case. All right. Hopefully that works out for everybody. Let's keep things moving. Again, drop your questions in the chat. Week 12 waiver wire discussion. Chris Allen, Matt LaMarca. Let's go ahead and see what else we got. This from Joseph Garcia. Is Jonnu Smith a viable flex over Romeo Doubs in non-PPR leagues for this week? I'd say before we get into this specific question, LaMarca, how do you feel about roster or like starting, not even just rostering, but starting 2 tight ends? Because to me, that seems like a bit of an off the wall strategy, but I think it requires a specific type of tight end or tight ends plural in order to do it. But what would you like? What would your approach be for this type of strategy?
I think you can do it. I mean, you want, specifically in a week like week 12, where we have so many teams on buys, we're going to have to get a little bit creative with our roster submission. In general, I would say that tight ends are going to have a lower ceiling than a wide receiver. But, in this specific instance, if it's Jonnu Smith versus Romeo Doubs, I kind of like what Jonnu brings to the table a little bit more than what Doubs does. His role in the offense has really grown over the past few weeks. 92% route participation in week 11, 21% target share. Obviously, he's coming off of the huge fluky game with 100 plus yards and a couple of scores. I don't think you can expect that every week, but I do think that this is a guy who is clearly in the tight end one conversation at this point. Like, he's a legitimately startable fantasy tight end.
I agree. And I think if you have the right set of tight ends in order to roster and start, you could actually use that as a potential flex option for you. We wouldn't do it with any 2 tight ends, right? I wouldn't be trying to say that you have to have Mark Andrews and Hunter Henry in your starting lineup. I mean, both viable tight ends, and Mark Andrews, not so much, but either of those 2 are fine on a weekly basis, but starting both of them kind of capture upside given how few targets they get, how little they might be used in the red zone compared to other tight ends and or other players you could potentially put in your flex. So for Jonnu Smith specifically, since Tua Tagovailoa has come back to the roster, around like a 20-ish% target share over the past 4 weeks, and also Tua is playing a little bit differently. We're not seeing the deep shots that we saw in the first couple of weeks when he was still healthy, and of course throughout all of the 2023 season, his passing average depth of target has dropped down. So for folks that were rostering Jalen Waddle, that's part of the issue that's coming to guys like Waddle, where if you run routes that are farther down the field and your quarterback isn't targeting down the field as much, this is what's going to happen. So for Jonnu Smith specifically, seeing his ADOT around 5-6 yards, also getting the targets in what we know is going to be more of a pass happy or pass friendly type of offense, especially on a team that needs to continue to rack up wins in order to stay competitive in the division. I think going him over Romeo Doubs, that plays more of that, I would say, volatile style, being a perimeter wide receiver that operates downfield. I think going with Jonnu Smith this week makes complete sense. But let's revisit. I would say revisit that after your Thursday night game. So let's say who's on the Thursday night game? I forget who plays on the Thursday night game. But
Thursday is Steelers Browns this week.
Okay, so let's say in this instance, let's say you have any of the Browns pass catchers. Let's say you have George Pickens or you're starting Russ or Najee or whatever. Let's say if any of those guys underperform and you need some punch out of your roster, you might consider trying to play Romeo Doubs over Jonnu Smith. But if come Sunday morning, everything's all square, 0-0, no problems there from a matchup standpoint, Jonnu Smith in your lineup, I have no issues with. All right, let's keep things going. I think we see a few more questions that have been popped up in the chat. Let's see, where have we got this? Another one from TB12 BB6. All right, let's see what he also, like, he has another question up. Let's see, would you keep both Daniels and Nix rest of the season or trade one? What's a realistic return for either? Now, Jaden Daniels, we just talked about, should pop up for another good game with that divisional match against the Cowboys. But what are you feeling about Bo Nix, Lamarca? Coming into the season, I did have some concerns about how he was going to work inside of Sean Payton's offense. His passing average depth of target coming out of college was relatively low. Didn't really seem like he fit with a guy like Courtland Sutton, who's going to be playing more of that perimeter, downfield, contested catch type of guy. But Bo Nix, with his legs and with having multiple options in the passing game, looks like a quarterback one. I think he's around the quarterback 8, 9, 10 somewhere on the season so far. So it looks like TB12 has 2 QB1s. Would you keep one, try and trade one? How do you look at this one?
Yeah, you can always try and trade from a surplus. So if you have 2 QB1s and you can only start one, it's never a bad idea to try and trade one. But the problem is, I don't know if you're necessarily going to get fair value for either. Mm-hmm. This is why QB1 quarterback leagues have become outdated, in my opinion. There's just too many guys that are good to start every week. I think if your goal is to try and trade one and maximize the return, you should be trying to move Daniels. I don't think anyone is giving up anything of value for Bo Nix. But if there's somebody out there who covets Daniels and you can turn that into a, top 15-ish, top 20-ish type running back or receiver, and that improves your roster significantly, I think that's a route that I would explore.
That makes absolute sense. Trying to make sure that you get the highest return out of the deal between those two quarterbacks, because really on a week-to-week basis, I mean, shoot, just looking at last week, I would be almost completely assured that Bo Nix outscored Jaden Daniels from a fantasy standpoint. So why not trade away Daniels? Keep a guy that has a decently high floor in Bo Nix. Ceiling can at least put him in the top 12 on a week-to-week basis. Folks might want to see if they can hit that ceiling outcome with Jaden Daniels versus is really anybody excited to roster Bo Nix? Are they going to be excited to make sure that they have him in their starting lineup? So I think I'm with you. And then the return I'd be looking for, especially looking at how many teams are going to be on bye this week, what running backs could you potentially get in return? Because I know a lot of folks are probably going to be hurting at that position. And with all the receivers as well, I mean, going back to the waiver wire article that Kendall Valenzuela has up on the site right now, if Elijah Moore is your best option out on the waiver wire, seeing what type of wide receiver production you can get back for a guy like Jaden Daniels should also be on there. So I'd say hitting one of those two core positions, trying to swing for the fences and get either an RB1, wide receiver one in that type of a deal, I think makes the most sense to me. So I'd be trying to target one of those, depending on where your roster is weakest at. See if you can get a high-end producer at either one of those positions.
Especially if you're in a comfortable spot and you don't need a win this week necessarily. Mm-hmm. Maybe you even try to trade for a player who is on bye, right? Like if there's a team out there that is struggling from a bye standpoint, they might be willing to quote unquote overpay if they are in a more desperate spot and looking for wins. So like the Bengals are on bye. I'm not saying you're going to be able to get Jamar Chase, but maybe you can get T. Higgins. And T. Higgins has been pretty darn good when he's been on the field this season. So, I think knowing your league and knowing which owners need to win and how their lineup is going to look in a week that's going to be heavy with buys, that kind of stuff is something you can exploit to get yourself a little bit of an edge if you're not the team that is desperate for the win this week.
True. And looking at the teams that are on bye right now, so we got Falcons, Bills, Bengals, Jaguars. Nobody's trading for anybody on the Jaguars, but Saints, and then also the Jets. So maybe Breece Hall, Bijan Robinson, James Cook. James Cook is probably somewhat attainable. So I'd say any of one of those running backs or wide receivers associated with those teams would be absolute studs that you might be able to add on your roster. So hopefully that's helpful. I'd say moving on from Daniels, that's out of those two, I think we both agree would be the better of those two options. But regardless, I think trying to move one of those and get back some like a decent return on those, I think would be your best option moving forward. All right. So again, any questions that you got for the chat, whether they're trade questions, strategy questions, waiver wire questions, that's what LaMarca and I are here to do for you for the next half hour or so. But again, if you can't get any of the content that you need from us from right now, check out the website. We've got the waiver column up, start, sit, tool, projections, all that stuff should be available. Most of the stuff for free. If not, check out our tier 2 subscription that should be available to you. Get access to all the utilization report analysis that's available from Dwayne McFarland. Absolutely one of the best products that you can get in the industry. So again, I advise everybody to check that out. But of course, we're here to kick it, talk to you guys. So put up whatever questions you have, and we'll get to them as soon as possible. So let's see. We've got a few more that we can
I posit you? Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
I have questions about the Browns.
Okay.
I am right. They're sitting at 2-8.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been very fun for fantasy purposes since Jameis Winston has taken over at quarterback.
Yeah.
What are the odds that we see Dorian Thompson-Robinson at some point? I think that with this team tanking, playing for the future, it doesn't make a ton of sense for them to be running Jameis Winston out there for a ton more starts. So, like, I'm pessimistic about the Browns moving forward because I think that by the time we get to the fantasy playoffs, there is a very real chance that DTR is going to be throwing passes to these guys as an excuse to, get a look at a guy that we have on our roster, AKA we're trying to lose games and improve our position in the draft.
It's possible. My only pushback would be that for their team specific, or for Jameis specifically, outside of, he only has the three starts so far. I would say in one of those, their loss was mostly on Jameis's shoulders when he threw the multiple interceptions against the Chargers. Now, last week, he did throw for over 300 yards and 2 touchdowns. Of course, he ripped up the Ravens for the most part. So I think he's performed well enough.
Has nothing to do with his performance.
Right. It has nothing to do with his performance. It'd be more towards if they want to evaluate. I would say the bigger indicator that we would see in order to indicate there's going to be some sort of change, if they start limiting or we see less and less of Nick Chubb. That would be the more indicator, because we know that Nick Chubb is the more or less the future of the Browns. There's no indication they're going to move on from. I thought they actually just re-extended him or adjusted his contract last year or the year beforehand. So I'd say that would give us the bigger indicator of whether or not they're trying to actually play for the future, see what else they might have on their roster, or more so than anything else. So I think that's a possibility. I will agree with you there, LaMarca. I would say that it's going to be things that we can't project, or at least I can't project as of right now. But keeping that in the back of your mind, I say would make some sense, especially as we get into the most critical part of the fantasy season.
Yeah, it's another sort of negative check mark for me working against Elijah Moore, right? Like,
true.
I don't think that Elijah Moore is a guy that I'm breaking the bank for this week. He may be the top ad of the week, which is sad to say because it is a pretty rough week from a waiver perspective. But we're talking about a guy who's his team's number 3 receiver in terms of routes. Target share isn't great either. He probably had the best game that he will have this season last week. If somebody else is willing to spend for that on the waiver wire, I'm happy to let them do so.
Yeah, I would agree with that. He wouldn't be the one that I would be while adding him makes sense, breaking the bank in order to do it or spending that number 1 waiver priority or a bunch of fab. I'm not in that particular camp, just given how volatile each week that the Cleveland wide receivers has been. It was a few weeks ago, it was Cedric Tillman, Jerry Jeudy last week, Elijah Moore this week. It could just wind up being David Njoku the week after. With as many pass catchers that Winston has at his disposal, saying that Elijah Moore is essentially going to go from the wide receiver 3 to the wide receiver 1, that's a bit tough for me to stomach. And of course, to your point, could the Browns start to have more of a 2025 view mindset? Entirely possible. All right, let's keep it moving. I think we saw one from Kai a bit ago, so let's see if we can answer that one real quick. Where was it? Oh, there it is. All right. Loaded with RB, some good matchups. Start 3. David Montgomery, Jahmyr Gibbs, both the Detroit Lions running backs. All right. Brian Robinson Jr., Kenneth Walker, Kareem Hunt, and this person also has Isaiah Pacheco on IR. So they really are loaded. All right. So out of those three, I guess just for a strategic question, just right off the rip, seeing that group, would you advise somebody to start both Lions running backs just off the rip, just seeing that?
Why not?
Okay.
I mean, it seems like those guys combined for about 3 touchdowns a week, so just monopolizing the Lions backfield touches just certainly would have worked out fine against the Jaguars. I have no problem with that strategy. The bigger one here, the bigger X factor is what's going to happen with Pacheco this week.
Mm-hmm.
He returned to practice. There's been some talk that this will be the week that he returns to the lineup. In his first game back, I'm not going to feel comfortable starting him or Kareem Hunt. Especially when you have this many options to choose from. I fully expect Pacheco to become the RB1 eventually. Mm-hmm. But in his first game back, could it be a little bit more of a timeshare with him and Kareem Hunt? I think that's possible. So I'm waiting for some injury news on KC. No issues with both Detroit guys. And then probably Kenneth Walker would be my next choice.
I think that those are the three that I will say out of that group, the four that I would choose in order to kind of make my decision around the 2 Detroit Lions running backs, and then B-Rob and Kenneth Walker. I think that's where I'm at, because for both Kenneth Walker and Brian Robinson, so for Robinson last week, so the Thursday night game was his first week back coming from the hamstring injury, and then he walked right into around a 60% rushing share. Of course, had all of the goal line touches. So that's what you would want from a running back standpoint. And we just mentioned earlier the matchup for Jaden Daniels going up against the Cowboys. We saw Joe Mixon have just an excellent day on the ground against the Cowboys rush defense. So if there was anybody out of the Washington offense that you would want to roster outside of Jaden Daniels, it would probably be Brian Robinson. So I think both Robinson and Walker have the workload. I would say that I'd lean more Brian Robinson's way, just given the matchup. And Walker has the divisional matchup against the Cardinals. Cardinals coming off of their bye have had a little bit of time to prep for the Seahawks. So say out of those three, I'd go Monty, Gibbs, B-Rob. I think for you, LaMarca, Monty, Gibbs, Kenneth Walker. But do you have any qualms either way if they were to go with Brian Robinson?
If I was going to start Robinson, I'd probably bench Montgomery. I think that Walker and Gibbs are the 2 strongest running backs in this tier. So, and if we go to our rankings tool, for week 12, that's how things are set up currently. Jahmyr Gibbs and Kenneth Walker as sort of tier 2 running backs, and then Montgomery and B-Rob as tier 3 guys. Okay. So, that's how I would view it. I personally lean Montgomery over Robinson, but no qualms if you wanted to make the flop there.
Sure. And I would say that for especially the Lions, it's good that they have both a pass or let's say a rush friendly mindset. From a conceptual standpoint, they're like bottom 10, bottom 12 in early down passing rate so far. But of course, we know that once they get inside of the 10, inside of the 5, it is less and less of a chance that we're going to see Jared Goff dropping back to pass versus David Montgomery plowing through the defensive front and getting into the end zone. So, and also the fact that Dan Campbell just loves running up the score. He has no problems with them. They could be up 40 points. Everybody's screaming for them to sit their starters. Nah, we're still going to be biting kneecaps like all the way down to the clock hits 0-0-0-0. It doesn't matter to them. So yeah, that's definitely fun for fantasy managers. But maybe as we get like deeper and deeper into the season or closer to the postseason, we might see them start to pull some of their if they continue to blow out teams as they have so far over the past like 3 to 4 weeks. All right, so seeing a few more questions in the chat. And of course, we're going to be doing this every week at about 1 o'clock Eastern on Tuesdays. Myself, Matt LaMarca, taking as many questions, whether they're strategy discussions, waiver wire discussions, again, pulling together all the tools. You just heard Lamarca referencing our rankings and projections are available on the site. Those are available for free. Go ahead and check those out. We've pulled up the utilization report game logs that's available with our tier 2 subscription. So definitely check that out. If you want to make sure that you're getting all the contextualized usage that we reference here on the show, whether it's on this show, the Betting Life show that Lamarca is a part of, the Fantasy Life show that I'm a part of with Ian Harditz and Dwayne McFarland, most of the statistics and metrics that we use on those shows all come from the content that you see here on the site or that we have available on the site. So if you can, definitely check those out. Make sure that you're subscribed. And if not, we'll try and, let's say, give as much as we can within the context of your question. But of course, I mean, see if you can get it subscribed to that because we have everything that you need all in one spot, fantasylife.com. Go and check that out. All right, few more questions. We've got about maybe 20 minutes left or so. Anthony Artisan here, half-point PPR, Addison, Adunze, Romeo Dobbs, Christian Watson needs 2 out of that group. Oh, man. I mean, we just talked about Dobbs and the volatility associated with him. Christian Watson, I believe, is on our waiver wire article for this week. Like Adunze and where the Bears are headed, I mean, I don't know. I would, at least for me personally, I say Christian Watson and Rome Odunze. Those would be my 2, but where are you at on this one, Lamarca?
I would pick one of the Packer guys. I prefer Watson. If you prefer Dobbs, that's fine too. But I think Watson offers more big play upside. And I think Jordan Addison is the best receiver in this group. He just has the toughest matchup this week.
Yeah.
Taking on the Bears. But could that work out in his favor, right? Like if Jalen Johnson spends the majority of his time working with Justin Jefferson, it could open up some additional opportunities for Jordan Addison. So I think these 4 guys are pretty razor thin. We have them all within 6 spots of each other in our rankings tool for week 12. I think Addison is the best player. So I'm going to give him just a slight edge, but I would say him and Christian Watson for me.
Completely fair. And to your point, Chicago has to face Minnesota this weekend. So the matchup for Rome Odunze, well, not Rome Odunze specifically, but maybe Caleb Williams having to go up against Brian Flores' defensive front may be a bit tougher sledding for Odunze. So I think going Christian Watson and Jordan Addison makes some sense. I think the only question that I have is the volatility that's typically associated with Jordan Addison. If anybody's most folks that watch
pretty much all of these guys are volatile though.
True. That actually, yeah, you're absolutely right. I take that back because Adunze plays on the outside, Romeo Dobbs plays on the outside, and Jordan Addison has one of the higher average depths of target. So there's really no easy button out of any of these guys, honestly. So if you did want to go up against the guy that has start the players that have the better matchup, it would be the guys, either of the Packers guys. We both lean towards Watson, and I would say Addison going up against the Bears secondary, who has had a couple of guys be injured here and there over the past couple of weeks. Say Jordan Addison might be the better of those guys, but let's see. Hopefully, especially for Bears fans that are hoping to see a bit more out of Caleb Williams in the passing game, they can put up another strong performance against what should be another tough out against Detroit after getting close and just one kick away from that divisional matchup against the Packers. But we'll see. Hopefully, I think they're going to put up another strong performance now with at least not having Shane Waldron calling the plays, and Caleb Williams can play a bit freer, but we'll see. I don't know, like real question, like how did you feel about Caleb just this past week? Because I thought he looked better. I thought he was scrambling a bit more, creating out of structure. Didn't feel like he was just trying to force things as much as we'd seen over the past 2.5, 3-ish months or so. I thought he looked better, but what was your general takeaway from seeing Caleb Williams without the shackles of Shane Waldron?
Yeah, my initial thought when I heard the news of, we're changing the play caller was, so what, right? Like it's the same offensive line. It's the same everything. But Williams did look a bit more comfortable, and the rushing is what really stood out, right? He was much more aggressive taking off with his legs. And I think that helped this offensive line that has just been absolutely murdered in their 2 previous games. But Minnesota is real tough defensively. And, Van Ginkel there is having a phenomenal season for them as a pass rusher.
Yeah.
This could be another game where Caleb is sort of under duress for the majority of it.
I could completely see it. And unless Caleb continues to play from a mental standpoint the way this past week, it could be another one of those games where we saw him during the middle parts of the season where he's just taking 5, 6, 7, 8 sacks or something along those lines. But yeah. All right. So let's keep things moving. A few more questions, maybe 10-ish minutes or so to go before we close things off for week 12 or heading into week 12. This one from Ross, 9-2, Jaden Daniels, no Burrow this week. Start him, or should I go ahead and pick up another quarterback like Tua or Sam Darnold? I don't know. I mean, I guess people are really scared off the past couple of weeks, and I guess tough outings for Washington at Pittsburgh in week 10, Eagles in week 11. We just talked about that, but I don't know, Lamarca. I'm thinking Jaden Daniels is a QB1, but at least from these past few questions, it seems like folks might be a little bit scared. I still think he should be in the inner starting roster without too many questions, but where are you at?
Yeah, unless you can go and pick up Jalen Hurts or Lamar Jackson or maybe Justin Herbert.
Yeah.
I think Jaden Daniels is the guy that I'm going to start this week. We have him at QB4 in our rankings. The matchup, as Chris alluded to, against the Cowboys is as good as it gets. This is a spot for Daniels to remind everyone just how good he is.
I agree. I mean, you can see here in our rankings, I'll go ahead and pull them up right now. And if we can share the screen so folks can see the difference between where we have Jaden Daniels ranked and where you can see some of the other guys listed here. Jaden Daniels all the way up at the top of tier 2. I mean, around guys like Kyler Murray coming off the bye, going against the Eagles. Bo Nix, we talked about it earlier. Jared Goff against the Colts and Brock Purdy. But all the rest of those guys, I mean, Tua down here, again, good matchup against the Patriots. Not that we've seen much pushback from their defensive secondary, but of course, then also I think you have to go down even farther to find Sam Darnold, who, if not for his, let's say, aggression, I mean, is passing around like 9-10 air yards per attempt, but also the number of turnovers he's generated. Have you heard this too, Lamarca, folks calling for what I think any of their backups right now, like Nick Mullins, I think I've heard, or something like that, they want to start over Sam Darnold. Like, have you heard this as well?
That's aggressive. Aggressive.
That's what I've been hearing. I've been hearing like strict Vikings fans calling for a quarterback change so far. I do wonder if a guy like Ryan Tannehill is going to wind up signing with the Vikings to see if he can get them over the hump, because I'm assuming they have playoff aspirations in mind, but is Sam Darnold really the guy that's going to take him to the promised land? I don't know if that's going to be the case. So let's see how things work out with Darnold, but given how his play over the past few weeks, I can understand the concern, but either way, for week 12, it has to be Jaden Daniels. No question about it. All right, let's keep things moving on. We got about 10-ish minutes or so before we go and close it out for week 12. Let's see what else we got. Let's see. From our chef, start 3, Pickens, Downs, Ladd, and Neighbors for week 12. For me, I think it's fairly easy considering I just said earlier about Ladd McConkey's potential injury for this week. Kind of takes him a tier down, at least out of the running based compared to the rest of those guys. But I'll toss it over to you, Lamarca. Are you with Pickens, Downs, and Neighbors as well, or would you throw Ladd into the mix here?
If Ladd's in the lineup, I'm playing Ladd. Okay. I mean, if Ladd is starting against the Ravens, man, he's like a borderline wide receiver 1 for me.
True. Yeah.
With the way that Justin Herbert's been playing and, sort of the consistent target share that he's seen all season. The odd man out for me is probably Josh Downs. As much as Anthony Richardson was better against the Jets, he's still not a guy that I necessarily want to be playing the wide receivers that he's attached to.
Yeah, and I would say, though, and this is where using or taking a look at the utilization report can be useful because, of course, Josh Downs did wind up outscoring Michael Pittman just this past week. And of course, we saw Anthony Richardson find the end zone a couple of times as a rusher. But in that same game, it was Michael Pittman that did have more targets than Josh Downs. It's just that Downs wound up outscoring him. So for everybody that wants to hop on the Josh Downs train and say that he's completely better than Michael Pittman, I would say that it's a split wide receiver room at the very least, and also a split wide receiver room with a quarterback that we know can have some ups and downs as a passer. It was good to see that step forward from Richardson in his first week back, but does have another tough out this week from a defensive standpoint. Going up against the Lions, we know that they've shut down a number of quarterbacks so far. So I think I kind of agree with you there, Lamarca. If Ladd is active, that's the easy decision. He should be elevated into the wide receiver one conversation. Malik Neighbors with Tommy Cutlets. Yeah, okay, that might have a bit of concern, but I would say given his target share, I'm not too out on him yet. And of course,
is he really that much worse than Daniel Jones?
He can't be, right? I don't think he can, but we'll see. We saw at least some good games from him in his first couple of starts from a rushing standpoint and also passing downfield. But we'll see how the Tommy Cutlets Part 2 experience goes for the Giants. But I'd say those three guys. If Ladd is active, Downs becomes the odd man out. If not, easy decision, start Downs.
Yeah, and him playing in prime time does complicate matters a little bit, but we'll see what the deal is at practice.
Yeah.
If he's limited, if he's a full go, if he's out, so we'll have more information. But again, McConkey for me, if he is going to play, needs to be in your lineups.
Yeah. I would practice reports will be the definite, and we should start to see that over the next couple of days. So we'll have a better idea once we get probably to Friday as to whether or not Ladd will be the guy that you want in your lineup. All right, few more questions, and then we'll hop on out for this week. Let's see what else we've got from the chat. Again, appreciate y'all stopping by. Again, have any other additional questions, fantasylife.com, waiver wire report, start sit tool, all that stuff should be available to you. So if we're not answering your questions here, go ahead and check out the website, and we should have you covered. All right, this one from Rod. I have Rashad and Bucky, so both Tampa Bay running backs. We talked about both Detroit running backs earlier. We got both the Bucks guys. We're trying to trade one. Which one should I keep? I don't know, man. This is a tough one for me. I lean towards Bucky Irving, just given his usage both as a pass catcher and a runner. And also he's a bit more of an explosive running back, a bit more efficient one too. But I don't know. Do you think that given White, he is the starter, he should be the guy to keep? Or where are you at on this one, LaMarca?
My answer is always, it depends on what the value is in the eyes of your league mates. If you have a league mate out there who values one compared to the other, that's the one that you should be trying to trade. If you're asking me which one I'd rather have, it's probably Rachaad White, just because of the pass catching workload that he has. Irving is the guy who's going to maintain that between the 20s type of rushing role. He's probably going to get the majority of the scoring chances around the goal line, but Rachaad White has just been a very good pass catcher out of the backfield, 26% target share in their last game. I always lean towards the passing production when it comes to the running back position. And for me, White is still the better option there. I think Irving's the better player, but White has the more desirable fantasy role at the moment.
Well, I think to your point earlier, as you were mapping out which quarterback to keep between, I think it was Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix, which one might get the better return. I think in this case, Bucky Irving might be the one to get the better return because people might have the similar ideals that I was talking about earlier. Bucky Irving he's the better guy. He's the more explosive runner. He's the more efficient. He should be the starter. And so if you sell it like that, you could get the better return. You could get a decent wide receiver too. If you were given the offer of, let's say, Bucky Irving for Jordan Addison, like we were talking earlier, do you think that'd be fair enough that it's at least worth conversation? I wouldn't say it's a slam dunk deal, but at least would that be the type of wide receiver would you be looking for? Or do you think you could net?
I think you could maybe even do a little bit better.
Okay.
Bucky Irving, looking again at our utilization tool now, he's been a top 18 running back in 4 of his last 5 games. So, do I think that continues? Probably not, right? The Bucks running backs have been doing a lot of pass catching with Mike Evans out of the lineup. And Evans, it does sound like, is on track to return. I think that it's possible that both of these guys, White and Irving, see a reduction in value moving forward.
Okay, I can agree with that. So maybe a wide receiver 2, 3 plus. So somebody Addison plus. So even being able to break down Bucky Irving into a 1-for-2 type of deal, or maybe you have to toss in another bench player in order to make it seem a bit more even. That's at least worth considering.
I don't think it's the worst idea to just keep both either. by the way. You know, it's nice. It's a nice handcuff type situation heading into the playoffs.
And with the way both are used in the passing game, it's completely fine to look at the upcoming matchups. And they've got Giants, Carolina, Raiders, Chargers. I mean, Dallas in week 16 when most folks are going to need that. So, I mean, multiple matchups there where if you had both of them, depending on how things shake out, I mean, either of those two could be the type of guy that you need in order to make sure you're pushing for a fantasy championship. All right, we'll get to one more question real quick, and then we're going to hop on out of here for week 12. Again, appreciate everybody stopping by. All right, this is from Sal. Who's better, Tajay Spears or Audric Estime? I don't know, man. Do you also get rug pulled by Audric Estime this past week? Because I know I did. I was one of those folks that was like, oh, yeah, of course. Like, it's going to be Estime, Javonte Williams that Sean Payton doesn't like anymore. And lo and behold, it's Williams that's finding the end zone. So between those two, I still lean Estime, just given the offensive environment for the Broncos as compared to the Titans. But would you, like, based off of what you've seen from a utilization standpoint, should Spears be in more consideration here?
I think Spears is the better upside play to have on your bench. You don't want to start either of them, but if you're just looking to fill out your lineup, your depth chart, if something happens to Tony Pollard, Tajay Spears becomes a very startable player. I think Estime would need a decent bit of help to get to the point where we feel comfortable putting him in our lineups.
I think, yeah, I can agree with that. And the hope would be that as the Titans can, I know that they've been more of a pass-friendly type of offense. This was, I guess, specifically to Calvin Ridley, or also Nick Westbrook-Ikhine has been popping up for a few games here and there. But still, I would hope that they start to get more of a rotation between Pollard and Spears. So I think the upside play is definitely there for him. So I get that. All right, so let's go ahead and wrap things up. Again, I appreciate everybody stopping by. Even saw my brother Tip Major out there asking some questions. So again, I think especially for his question, Trey Benson, contingent back. We talked about him a little bit ago, but again, appreciate you stopping by, Tip. And of course, thanks to everybody that popped into the chat. And if we didn't get your questions, go ahead and check out FantasyLife.com. All of the stuff that you'll need from a waiver wire standpoint, utilization standpoint, all that stuff should be available to you, if not for free, but check out our Tier 2 subscription if you can. But that's it. That wraps things up for week 2. Again, we'll be back in around the same time next week in order to dive into week 13. I cannot believe we're so far into the season. Of course, again, thanks again for stopping by. I'm Chris.